Khamzat Chimaev has never been a stranger to chaos, but even by his volatile standards, the events that unfolded during a recent UFC press event were extraordinary. What began as a verbal confrontation between Chimaev and middleweight champion Dricus du Plessis spiraled into an all-out melee that ultimately dragged Islam Makhachev's entire camp into the fray. The intensity, the emotion, and the implications for multiple divisions made it one of the most electric and controversial moments in recent MMA history. It started with an interview gone sideways. Media members had gathered in Abu Dhabi to cover several headliners ahead of a major UFC card, with cameras rolling and the world watching. Khamzat Chimaev, who had been sidelined due to health issues following his last bout, was expected to announce his return to the octagon. Meanwhile, du Plessis, fresh off his brutal title victory over Sean Strickland, was riding high and enjoying his newfound status. The two fighters were scheduled to appear on separate panels. That was the plan, until Chimaev made his way into the media room during du Plessis' interview segment. What followed was raw, unscripted hostility. Chimaev, speaking loudly and walking directly up to du Plessis, accused the South African fighter of ducking him. "You know you ran from me," Chimaev said, pointing his finger, voice trembling with fury. Du Plessis stood up from his chair slowly, a bemused smirk crossing his face. "I just knocked out a guy you would have lost to," he replied, referencing Chimaev's previous weight-cutting issues and the cancelled bouts that had plagued his career. The energy shifted in an instant. What had been verbal jousting turned sharply threatening as Chimaev shoved a table forward, knocking over microphones and water bottles. Security rushed in, but not before du Plessis stepped around the wreckage to square off with Chimaev. "You're not in my league," du Plessis barked. "I fight champions. You fight bloggers." As the two were being separated, cameras caught Chimaev shouting something in Russian. It wasn't until later that analysts translated the phrase as, "You'll see what happens when wolves come." To many, that seemed like typical bravado, but to those who knew the makeup of Chimaev's camp, it carried more weight. Chimaev's tight-knit group of Chechen fighters, many of whom trained closely with Islam Makhachev, were in the building, and they were watching. Tensions were already high between Chimaev and Islam Makhachev's team, despite their shared Dagestani and Chechen roots. While they respected each other publicly, whispers had long swirled about private rivalries, personality clashes, and deep-rooted tensions regarding who truly carried the legacy of Khabib Nurmagomedov. Chimaev, for all his talents, was known to operate independently of the strict hierarchy respected in Dagestan's martial arts culture. Makhachev, on the other hand, had inherited the mantle of Khabib's discipline and structure, earning the title of lightweight king and building a legacy that some believed Chimaev coveted. Following the confrontation with du Plessis, Chimaev didn't immediately back down. He stormed backstage, where members of Islam's team were standing near the fighter entrance. Cameras didn't capture the first few moments, but eyewitnesses reported that voices were raised and punches were thrown. According to several onlookers, Chimaev approached Makhachev's longtime teammate Abubakar Nurmagomedov and accused him of siding with cowards. That accusation was reportedly met with a shove, and then all hell broke loose. Within seconds, what had been a tense conversation exploded into a full-blown skirmish. Coaches tried to intervene, but the scene became chaotic as bodies moved, limbs flew, and the area was overwhelmed with shouting, cursing, and the crashing of equipment. At least 4 fighters were involved, including Chimaev himself, who was seen wrestling 2 men to the ground while shouting profanities in multiple languages. Islam Makhachev arrived on the scene moments later, reportedly pulled back by his coach Javier Mendez, who repeatedly screamed, "Not here. Not like this." The melee lasted less than 2 minutes, but its impact was seismic. UFC President Dana White was said to be furious, calling the incident completely unacceptable, though insiders claimed he privately acknowledged the promotion gold it created. "This isn't what we want," White said in a press conference the next day. "But let's be honest, this is why people watch." Indeed, the fallout was immediate. Social media lit up with footage of the altercation. Fighters posted cryptic comments, and fans debated loyalties. Was Chimaev out of line, or was du Plessis the true instigator? Was Islam's team simply defending their integrity, Or were they protecting a power structure that Chimaev had begun to threaten? Within 48 hours, the UFC announced internal disciplinary measures but refused to disclose specifics. Fines were rumored. Security was reportedly beefed up at the fighters' hotels. But the biggest consequence was the redrawing of narrative lines within the UFC universe. Chimaev was no longer just a boogeyman to be feared inside the cage. He had now positioned himself as a rogue agent in a wider geopolitical drama unfolding within MMA. For Chimaev, the incident further cemented his status as the sport's most polarizing figure. His rise had been meteoric, a series of dominant performances across multiple weight classes, a mystique built on savagery, and a cult following among fans who saw in him a throwback to the days when fighters didn't play by the rules. Yet, for all his talent, questions lingered about his stamina, his discipline, and his ability to coexist with other top-tier fighters. The Brawl did nothing to dispel those doubts. For Plessis, the altercation became an unexpected PR win. Though initially mocked for doing nothing during the scuffle, replays showed he wisely backed off, allowing UFC staff to intervene. The champ later said, "I didn't come to fight backstage. I came to defend my belt in the cage." That maturity resonated with fans and added an air of legitimacy to his reign. But he also issued a warning: if Chimaev wants to come to my division, let him come clean. No weight games. No drama. Just war. Islam Makhachev, for his part, was diplomatic in public statements but privately livid, according to several sources close to the fighter. Known for his calm demeanor and tactical mindset, Islam had built his legacy on discipline and order, values that Chimaev appeared to undermine. Still, Makhachev refused to escalate the situation, instead emphasizing his commitment to defending his title and focusing on Charles Oliveira, who was gunning for a rematch. But beneath the surface, a narrative was boiling. Some insiders claimed the fight wasn't just about honor, it was about control. With Khabib retired, the Russian-speaking MMA world was in flux. Islam represented continuity, Chimaev represented disruption. And in the wake of the Brawl, it was clear the UFC was now home to a civil war brewing among its Eastern European elite. What made the situation even more complex was the shared history between many of the fighters involved. Chimaev had trained with many in Islam's camp in earlier days, often praised by coaches for his raw power and relentless aggression. But as his fame grew, so too did his distance from the traditional Dagestani structure. Chimaev's move to Sweden, his flamboyant social media presence, and his refusal to conform to any camp's rules left a bitter taste in the mouths of purists who had long valued humility and discipline above all else. This cultural clash, between Chimaev's lone wolf style and Islam's team-first philosophy, has now become the defining rivalry within the UFC, even if it isn't fought directly in the cage. In the days following the incident, the UFC issued warnings to all parties, reiterating its zero-tolerance policy toward violence outside the octagon. Yet the reality is that such moments often fuel storylines that drive interest in pay-per-view sales. With Chimaev eyeing a title shot in either the middleweight or welterweight division, and Plessis standing firm atop the 185-pound mountain, a collision seems inevitable. If the UFC leans into the drama, as history suggests it will, the matchup could be booked sooner rather than later. As for Islam, his path remains tied to the lightweight division, but whispers of a future showdown with Chimaev at 170 or even a catchweight fight are growing louder. People think it's just about belts, one coach close to both camps said. But this is deeper. This is about respect, about legacy, about who owns the soul of Eastern MMA. Indeed, Chimaev's outburst and subsequent clash with Islam's team may have created one of the UFC's richest dramatic arcs. With fan bases across Europe, the Middle East, and beyond, the battle lines are now drawn not just along weight classes but between ideologies. Chimaev's unapologetic savagery versus Islam's disciplined dominance. Plessis, caught between the fire, may find himself playing kingmaker in a war not of his own making. Whatever happens next, one thing is certain: the UFC has entered a new era. No longer are the rivalries contained to the cage. Now, the octagon is just one of many battlefields where grudges, cultures, and empires collide. And in the eye of the storm stands Khamzat Chimaev, unbroken, unrepentant, and unmistakably dangerous.